영어 동화 세상 리틀팍스.
The Extraordinary Adventures of Arsène Lupin, Gentleman Burglar. The Arrest of Arsène Lupin, Part 1. The voyage began as many such voyages do. The air quivered with excitement, adventure, and a sense of mystery as my fellow passengers and I boarded the transatlantic steamship Provence. We enjoyed making each other's acquaintance, and though we were sociable and charming, we kept the safe distance that characterizes those who may never see each other again. Here on this ship, we had the luxury of being isolated from the world, except for one inescapable link, the wireless telegraph. Its voice followed us around like an ever-present shadow, whispering words of the outside world. I was the recipient of 2 telegrams. Others too received messages from family and friends wishing them bon voyage. However, on the second day of our voyage, we received a telegram so startling and vicious it destroyed the peace we had enjoyed up until that moment. It read, "Caution, Arsène Lupin is aboard the Provence. First-class cabin, blonde hair, wound on right forearm. Traveling alone under the name of..." At that most crucial moment, a flash of lightning interrupted the transmission, and the rest of the message never reached us. The passengers only knew Lupin was using an alias beginning with the letter R. That, however, was enough to rouse fear and apprehension among everyone on board the ship. Arsène Lupin! The infamous gentleman burglar's exploits were well reported in newspapers across France and in other European countries. "Horrible! Arsène Lupin is in our midst!" exclaimed Miss Nellie Underdown, the prettiest woman on the ship and, dare I say, loveliest of all lovely creatures on land. "They say Lupin is a man of 1,000 faces," I said. "He could appear as a chauffeur or a Russian physician, a Spanish bullfighter, or an old man. No one can say for certain what Lupin truly looks like. He is a master of disguise." "You do not put one's mind at ease," lamented Lady Gerlande, who was Miss Nellie's traveling companion. "How are we to secure our valuables?" A group of us had gathered on the rear deck of the ship, reclining comfortably on lounge chairs. The day was bright and warm, with no sign of the storm that had interrupted the notorious telegram. "How can we protect ourselves from this madman?" cried Miss Nellie. "I would hardly call Lupin a madman," I said, trying to comfort her and gently placing my hand on her shoulder. She lowered her eyes and blushed. "Monsieur d'Andrézy," said Miss Nellie, "you are on such intimate terms with the captain. Surely you know something?" I laughed, delighted by Miss Nellie's confidence in me. "I assure you I have no definite knowledge," I replied. "But can't we investigate this matter just as well as Detective Ganimard, the personal enemy of Arsène Lupin?" It was common knowledge that Ganimard had vowed to bring Lupin to justice, even if he had to follow Lupin to the ends of the earth. "It sounds a bit complicated," said Miss Nellie. "Lupin's vocation, though unsavory to many, does take a certain amount of skill. Every movement detailed and timed to the second." "If I may be so bold as to speak," interrupted Monsieur Rosen, a young man who rivaled me for the affections of Miss Nellie earlier, "it appears that you admire Lupin, Monsieur Bernard d'Andrézy." Ignoring his comment, I continued, "Lupin's skill demonstrates not the work of a madman, Miss Nellie, but the art of a clever, organized, and very meticulous person." "But then, who could ever catch such a man?" Miss Nellie sighed, her full lips in a pout. I took a moment to reflect on the exquisite Miss Nellie, with her golden hair and deep emerald eyes. Her skin was like porcelain, and her body was as perfectly proportioned as that of Venus, the goddess of beauty. "My dear, all this dreadful talk has left me quite weak," Lady Gerlande murmured. "I shall retire to my quarters to lie down before tea." I waited patiently until Lady Gerlande left before going on. Although we might not be quite as resourceful as the celebrated detective Ganimard, we do have some facts to help us determine who Lupin may be. "Please explain, Monsieur d'Andrézy," pleaded Miss Nellie. "With pleasure," I said, bowing, and removed a passenger list from my right pocket. Using my left hand to unfold the paper took a few moments, and everyone patiently waited for me to resume. First, Lupin is using an alias beginning with R, I reminded them. That's a common letter for a surname, argued Rosen. Second, he is traveling alone, I noted. So are half the passengers on this ship, Rosen interjected. Miss Nellie nodded vigorously in agreement, and Rosen's face lit up. Third, he is blonde, I smiled at everyone. Well, Rosen shrugged his shoulders. Well, now it is a matter of process of elimination, I said. Here on this passenger list, there are only 13 men with surnames that begin with R, and 9 are family men. That leaves just 4 who are traveling alone, calculated Miss Nellie. Correct, mademoiselle, I nodded. Of the 4, 1 is the Marquis de Rivaldin. He is the secretary to the American ambassador, interrupted Miss Nellie. I know him well. I scrolled down the list. The second is Major Rawson. He's my uncle, someone else called out. Monsieur Revolta is the third, I said. That's me, exclaimed a dark Italian with a heavy black beard. You can hardly be called a blonde, said Miss Nellie. And finally, I paused before continuing, Monsieur Rosen. All eyes fixed on the young, blonde-haired man. He turned red and was rendered speechless. Well, Monsieur Rosen, have you anything to say? Miss Nellie demanded of him. This is insanity, Rosen finally cried. He struggled to his feet. Some of the women recoiled in terror. I admit I fit the description of that scoundrel Lupin, but I swear I am not he, Rosen shouted excitedly. Didn't the telegram say something about a wound? Asked Miss Nellie. Everyone nodded and began murmuring. I can prove to you I have no such wound, sputtered Rosen, rolling up his left shirt sleeve. Smiling secretly, I remembered the wound was said to be on his right arm, not on his left. I was about to call attention to that fact when a loud scream erupted from the sleeping quarters. Everyone abandoned the deck and rushed to the inner part of the ship. Help! Help! Lady Gerlande wailed frantically. Her cheeks were smeared with makeup and tears. She was breathing heavily. They're gone! My jewels, my pearls, they're gone! I led the way into Lady Gerlande's cabin. Pieces of jewelry still lay on top of her dresser. The thief had taken only the most precious diamonds and pearls and left the rest. Each stolen jewel had been carefully removed from its mounting. Yes, Lady Gerlande's unblemished pearls were indeed a prize, I whispered to Miss Nellie. Who could have done this? Lady Gerlande wept bitterly. The passengers looked at one another. They had all reached the same conclusion. This was the work of Arsène Lupin. The Extraordinary Adventures of Arsène Lupin, Gentleman Burglar. The Arrest of Arsène Lupin, Part 2. I have attempted to relate in detail the affairs aboard the Provence thus far. In light of the circumstances, I was not surprised that, after Lady Gerlande's jewels were stolen, all eyes shifted to Monsieur Rosen. Everyone thought the captain would detain Rosen, who surely had to be Lupin, for the remainder of the voyage. But to our amazement, the next day, Rosen was walking around a free man. What do you mean he's been released? Barked Lady Gerlande. His documents show that he is who he says he is, I explained. And he did not have a wound on his right arm. The captain had no evidence to arrest him. Documents! Exclaimed Lady Gerlande. Lupin could furnish as many documents as might be desired. Soon after the theft, Rosen announced a reward of 10,000 francs for the capture of Lupin. If no one assists me, declared Rosen, I will find the scoundrel myself. Ah, Rosen against Arsène Lupin, or rather, according to popular opinion, Arsène Lupin against himself, I thought. The contest promises to be interesting. The captain and crew displayed admirable tenacity as they ransacked every cabin, leaving no stone unturned. The jewels had to be concealed somewhere aboard ship. All was quiet for the next few days. Miss Nellie and I watched as Rosen searched everywhere, even in the life jackets stored under the lifeboats. "What does he hope to find?" whispered Miss Nellie. "Does Lupin have magical powers to shrink himself to the size of a rat? Or would he be foolish enough to hide the jewels in plain view?" "If I were Rosen, I would examine the lining of our hats, the hems of skirts, and everything we carry with us," I said, holding up my camera as an example. Within a device as compact as this, a person could hide jewels. He could pretend to take pictures, and nobody would suspect a thing. "But even the cleverest of thieves must leave some clue behind," Miss Nellie insisted. "Generally speaking, perhaps," I replied, "but with one exception, Lupin." "Why must he be excluded?" demanded Miss Nellie. "Because most thieves concentrate on the theft and carelessly leave behind some trace of themselves. Lupin, however, focuses on all the circumstances that could somehow serve as a clue to his identity," I explained. "That is why no one has been able to catch him. They don't know who he is." "Earlier, you were so confident that you could discover the identity of Lupin, Monsieur d'Andrézy," Miss Nellie remarked. "Indeed I was," I admitted, "but since I have seen him at work, I think we are wasting our time." The investigation into Lady Gerland's stolen jewels resulted in disappointment. In the meantime, the captain's watch was stolen too. Furious, the captain once again turned his attention to Rosen. The next evening, however, Rosen's claim of innocence was justified. An officer on deck heard groans coming from under the lifeboats. He found Rosen tied up, his head wrapped in a scarf, and with a card that revealed the perpetrator pinned to his coat. It read, "Arsène Lupin gladly accepts the 10,000 francs offered by Monsieur Rosen." As for the captain, he should ask his second officer for the time of day. Rosen's wallet was empty, and the captain later found his watch inside the officer's quarters. Arsène Lupin was now anybody and everybody. Fear permeated the ship as people prayed for the remainder of the voyage to pass without further incident. I, on the other hand, was probably the only passenger to benefit from the near panic on the ship. It brought Miss Nellie and me closer together. She was afraid and mistrusted others, so I availed myself of her companionship throughout the ordeal. Miss Nellie and I shared many delightful hours together. She spoke fondly of her world travels, and I took photos of her with my camera. And now we waited anxiously as the Provence approached the shores of America. "Monsieur d'Andrézy," Miss Nellie cried breathlessly, "it appears we have a welcoming committee." She pointed to a group of uniformed officers standing on the dock. As the Provence pulled in, the officers separated to allow one man to walk through. I gasped. "You are pale, monsieur." Miss Nellie grabbed my right arm. I flinched, but managed to suppress a cry of pain. "Do you see that little man?" I pointed, and then handed my camera to her. "The one wearing the green coat and carrying an umbrella?" said Miss Nellie. "That very one. He is the famous Detective Ganimard," I replied. "Ganimard?" repeated Miss Nellie. "Yes, the detective who has dedicated his life to capturing Arsène Lupin," I continued. "That can mean only one thing." "He will arrest Lupin?" Miss Nellie asked excitedly. I shrugged. "No doubt Lupin already knows his enemy is here. He will be in no hurry to leave the ship." The passengers walked down the gangway, but Ganimard appeared to pay no attention to the crowd disembarking from the ship. Even Rosen walked off without a glance from the detective. Who could Lupin be? Miss Nellie wondered aloud, scrutinizing the few faces that remained on deck. The captain signaled for Miss Nellie and me to walk down the gangway next. We had not taken more than 10 steps when Ganimard blocked our way. "A moment, please," he said. "What is the meaning of this, officer?" I demanded. "You know well what the meaning is." Here, Ganimard paused. "Monsieur Lupin." I laughed loudly. "You are mistaken, sir. I am Bernard d'Andrézy. I believe Lupin was sailing under a name beginning with R." Ganimard smiled coldly. That telegram was a clever trick. It deceived everyone but me. I am well acquainted with your tactics, Lupin, and now your time is up." "Stop," Miss Nellie said. "Monsieur d'Andrézy is a gentleman." "Bernard d'Andrézy died 3 years ago," said Ganimard, and he raised his umbrella and struck my right arm with it. I cried out in pain. The wound had not yet healed and began to bleed again. I had no choice but to surrender. "Yes, I am the man you are looking for. However, what evidence do you have that I committed any crime?" I turned to Miss Nellie. Our eyes locked, and she glanced at the camera in her hand. She now understood what was inside the camera. "I am confident we will find what we are looking for," Ganimard said, his face close to mine. Miss Nellie walked past the detective and me, and then suddenly she seemed to trip. Faking awkwardness, she let the camera fall into the water between the ship and the pier. Then she walked down the gangway and was quickly lost in the crowd. She had passed out of my life forever. I turned to Ganimard and said, "It is indeed a shame that I am not an honest man. This is the story Arsène Lupin told me of his arrest. We are friends, and he occasionally comes to see me, bringing his youthful spirit with him. I have seen him 20 times, and each time he is a different person. As I sit here organizing my notes, I plan to one day publish the affairs of this gentleman burglar. I hope the public will be able to refer to my work and say, 'Arsène Lupin did that.' Now, let me share with you what happened to Lupin in prison." The Extraordinary Adventures of Arsène Lupin, Gentleman Burglar. Arsène Lupin in Prison, Part 1. On a rock in the middle of the Seine River sits a little manor called Malaquis Castle. Connected to the mainland only by an arched bridge, Malaquis Castle has been surrounded by intrigue and menace since it was built. Many legends surround the mysterious castle. One legend tells of a famous tunnel that supposedly led to an abbey and the house of a lover of a French king. A most eccentric millionaire, Baron Cahorn, lived alone in the castle with his treasures and 3 old servants. He lived in constant fear, but not in fear for his life. Oh no. He feared that his private collection of antique furniture, rare art, and wood carvings would be stolen. So he barricaded himself in the castle, and every day at sunset locked the iron gates at each end of the bridge. The Baron guarded his private art collection as possessively and passionately as a jealous lover. One September day, a man with merry eyes and a pleasant manner showed up at one gate with some newspapers. "Good morning, Baron Cahorn," the man said in a friendly voice. Partially opening the gate, the Baron scrutinized the man as if he had never seen him before. "Why are you looking at me like that?" said the man, laughing. "It is only I, the postman, who comes every day." "One can never be too sure about who people are," muttered the Baron. The Baron took the newspapers and was about to close the gate when the postman exclaimed, "Oh, here is something new, Baron." The postman handed him a thin envelope. "For me?" Having no intimate friends or business relations, the Baron seldom, if ever, received any letters. So he reacted to this occurrence with both suspicion and alarm. "It's a registered letter, sir. Please sign here," said the postman. Baron Cahorn signed, took the letter, and watched as the man tipped his cap and disappeared down the road, whistling an aria from the magic flute. Then, leaning against the gate, he tore open the letter. It contained one sheet, bearing the letterhead of Santé Prison in Paris. He scanned quickly down to the signature. It read, "Arsène Lupin." Breathing rapidly, the Baron read the letter. "My dearest Baron Cahorn, allow me to applaud you on your exquisite collection of fine art." To the Baron's horror, not only did the letter name in detail the paintings and other treasures inside his castle, but the writer also revealed the exact location of each item he specifically wanted. "How could anyone possibly know?" the Baron shouted into the air. "No one has set foot inside my castle," he continued to read. "I humbly request that these particular items be packed carefully and shipped to me within 8 days, to the address below. However, If you will not oblige, then I will have to remove them myself. Expect me on the night of September 27th. I apologize for any inconvenience. Sincerely, Arsène Lupin. P.S. Don't send the Jean-Antoine Watteau painting. Although you paid 30,000 francs for it, it is only a copy. The letter quite upset the Baron. Being well acquainted with the recent crimes reported in the newspapers, he was only too familiar with the name Arsène Lupin. He knew Lupin had been arrested in America by the celebrated detective Ganimard and was now imprisoned in Sainty prison. The Baron, however, also knew that, with Lupin, nothing was impossible. That evening, the Baron wrote a letter to the local police captain, enclosing Lupin's letter and requesting protection. The reply came immediately, informing the Baron that Lupin was in Sainty prison under close surveillance and without letter-writing privileges. No doubt the letter was from an impostor making idle threats. Still, the Baron was not convinced, and his hopelessness and despair grew as each day passed. However, one morning, he found a glimmer of hope when he read the Caudebec Revealer, a local newspaper. The celebrated detective who captured Arsène Lupin has been spotted in town taking a well-deserved rest. An enthusiastic fisherman, Detective Ganimard, is seldom missing from the river, Baron Cahorn read aloud, and then cried, "Ganimard is here! Only he can help!" The town of Caudebec was just 6 kilometers away, so immediately the Baron went to the offices of the Revealer and spoke to the reporter who had written the article. "Ganimard?" the young reporter repeated. "It is of the utmost urgency," exclaimed the Baron. "You must tell me where he is." The reporter scratched his head and said, "You are sure to find him fishing on the riverbank. I happened to meet him there one day and noticed that his name was engraved on his fishing pole." He pointed outside his window at a man wearing a straw hat and fishing at the river's edge. "There he is now." The Baron left the reporter and ran toward the river. He approached the famous Ganimard and introduced himself. The detective, however, responded with silence. Then the Baron burst forth with his story about his treasures, Lupin, and the letter, as the man sat motionless. "Please, Monsieur Ganimard," pleaded the Baron, "I am in desperate need of your help." Without removing his eyes from his fishing pole, the man replied, "Burglars do not customarily warn people before they rob them, especially Lupin." "But the letter?" "If this were the work of Lupin," said Ganimard, with a slight smile, "which it obviously is not, it would be my pleasure to assist you, Baron. Unfortunately, Lupin is already locked up." "He could have escaped," the Baron retorted. Ganimard finally faced him, unsmiling. "No one has ever escaped Sainty prison," said the detective. "Now, go home and sleep soundly. You're frightening the fish." Then he turned his gaze back to the river. The Baron went home, somewhat reassured by Ganimard's words. He was beginning to believe that he had possibly overreacted, but every night he still checked each bolt and lock in the castle. When September 26th arrived, so did a message, and the Baron's initial anxieties were reawakened. "A telegram for you, sir," announced a servant. The Baron snatched the telegram and read, "The items I requested have not been delivered. Prepare to see me tomorrow night. Lupin." The Baron hastened to Caudebec and found Ganimard at the same spot by the river. "Lupin is coming!" the Baron shouted as he shoved the telegram in the detective's face. "Now he will take away my treasures!" Ganimard put down his fishing pole and said in a cold voice, "I'm on vacation. I don't want to bother myself with such silliness." "Come to my castle and protect my valuables," the Baron begged. "Name your price." Ganimard smiled coolly and said, "You will be throwing your money out the window." "I don't care," cried the Baron. "Then I accept on one condition," replied Ganimard. "You must not speak to anyone of my involvement. It must be kept a secret." "You have my word," the Baron promised. "I'll see you tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock, and I'll be bringing some men to help me," said the detective. "Before I arrive, Put all your valuables in one room in the main part of the castle.